Nebraska, 1933. A farmer wakes before sunrise in a house he owns outright. No banker is calling. No mortgage note is coming due. The root cellar is stocked. The windmill still turns. He can repair his own machinery, sharpen his own blades, butcher his own meat, and pull a crop from hard ground with hands that have already survived drought, falling prices, and the slow humiliation of selling into a market that no longer pays. By every instinct that matters to an independent man, he should be secure. Then the county arrives, not with soldiers, not with emergency decrees, not with a mob or a seizure order stamped by some distant wartime office. It arrives with a ledger, a delinquency notice, a statutory process, and a number small enough to sound almost absurd against the acreage beneath his boots. $50. An unpaid tax bill. That is the breach, and that is the point. In periods of economic breakdown, governments do not usually need to suspend the law to take physical assets. They use the law exactly as written. The land is assessed. The tax is owed in cash. The income that once paid it collapses. Penalties accrue. A lien attaches. A sale is scheduled. Ownership changes hands under color of procedure. And afterwards everyone says the same thing. Nothing illegal happened. That is how normality breaks. In the American farm crisis of the early Depression years, prices fell so hard that the problem was no longer productivity, work ethic, or even in many cases debt. It was cash flow. Corn, wheat, cotton, cattle what families sold brought in less, while fixed obligations remained fixed. Across the country, about 750,000 farms were lost through foreclosure and bankruptcy sales between 1930 and 1935. This video is about the quieter flank of that same disaster. How land is taken legally through tax delinquency. Why ownership alone does not protect you. And the one defense that matters when the economy stops honoring your timeline. The mistake most landowners make is imagining confiscation as an extraordinary act. They picture raids, emergency orders, new legislation, open political hostility. They imagine that for land to be taken, the state must first declare itself openly predatory. Historically, that is often unnecessary. The more durable system is quieter. It does not begin by contesting your title. It begins by enforcing a recurring obligation attached to the title you already hold. Property tax is not a one-time purchase price. It is a continuing condition of ownership. And that distinction matters more in a downturn than almost anything else. A mortgage can be paid off. A county tax obligation cannot be paid off in the same way, because next year it returns. That is the mechanism. First, the property is assessed. Then a tax is levied according to local law. If payment is missed, the account becomes delinquent and penalties begin to accumulate. In many jurisdictions, the delinquency then hardens into a lien against the property itself, not merely against the owner as a person. From there, the government may hold the lien, sell the lien to an investor, or move toward a tax deed or foreclosure process depending on the state. The details vary by jurisdiction, but the architecture is consistent. Missed taxes are converted into an enforceable claim on the asset. Official county guidance today still describes the same core sequence: delinquency, penalties, default, redemption rules, and eventual auction or sale. That is why the popular phrase, "I own my land free and clear," is only partially true. You may own it free and clear of a bank. You do not own it free and clear of the tax system surrounding it. In stable years, that distinction feels academic. In contracting years, it becomes decisive. The forensic record from the farm crisis makes this brutally plain. Federal agricultural analysis from the early Depression noted that falling farm prices intensified the difficulty of paying both interest and taxes, and contributed to rising mortgage and tax delinquency. In other words, the problem was not simply debt in the narrow sense. It was a collapsing cash stream meeting obligations that did not collapse with it. So the promise of this episode is narrow and practical. I am not telling you that every county is coming for your land. I am telling you that when economic stress arrives, Legal seizure usually travels through the tax channel because the tax channel is already built, already normalized, and already legitimate in the public mind. What looks like confiscation at the household level often looks like administration at the county level. And that is exactly why it works. Now we can perform the autopsy. The popular memory of the 1930s farm collapse usually centers on bank foreclosures, dust storms, and sheriff sales. All of that happened. But if you stop there, you miss the more important pattern. A farm did not have to be unproductive to become vulnerable. It only had to become illiquid. That is the distinction viewers need to hold on to. A family could possess land, tools, seed knowledge, stored food, and a degree of practical self-sufficiency that looks impressive from a distance. What it could not do was pay the county in potatoes, repair skills, or moral seriousness. Taxes had to be paid in money. And in the early Depression, money became the scarce thing. Farm income collapsed with commodity prices. Land values fell. Credit tightened. Buyers disappeared. What had looked like wealth on paper became a stranded asset in real life. You could be standing on 160 acres and still be unable to produce the cash required by a system that did not care whether your problem was solvency, liquidity, or timing. This is where ordinary people get trapped. They think in net worth. The system thinks in scheduled payment. A farmer might say correctly that his land was worth far more than the annual tax bill. The county did not need to dispute that. It only needed to enforce the fact that the bill was due before the land could be turned into spendable cash, and often in a market where the land could not be sold at any fair value anyway. That delay kills people. Not physically first, financially first, then socially, then psychologically. You can picture the sequence at street level. A wife starts stretching coffee with substitutes and postponing purchases in town. Repairs that were routine become seasonal gambles. A piece of equipment is cannibalized to keep another one alive. Livestock is sold into a weak market at the wrong time because cash is needed now, not 3 months from now. The county notice sits on a table longer than it should because nobody wants to admit what it means. Then fees and penalties begin to attach. Then somebody says they should borrow short-term against next season, but the bank is already defensive, or the collateral value has fallen, or the family has borrowed before and cannot do it again on tolerable terms. By the time the sale is discussed openly, most strategic choices are already gone. That is how legal transfer happens without dramatic violence. The emergency occurs inside the household first, and the key lesson is this: fixed obligations become predatory when income becomes unstable. Not because the obligation changed moral character overnight, but because time changed. The tax calendar kept moving at full speed while the farm economy was breaking in slow motion. This is also why the loss felt so bewildering to families who had been prudent by the standards of their world. They had avoided consumer excess. They had built competence. Many had real productive assets, but they misunderstood the hierarchy of claims. In a stress cycle, the state's recurring claim on land can outrank your subjective sense of ownership. Once you understand that, a great deal of bad advice collapses. The question is no longer, how do I hide what I own? The question becomes, how do I keep a cash claim from maturing into a legal claim on the title? That is the real fight, and most of the popular defenses do not survive first contact with that question. This is the point where people usually reach for legal architecture. They talk about land trusts, family LLCs, layered ownership vehicles, privacy strategies, off-record living, low-profile presentation, gray man tactics. All of it carries the same emotional promise. If the asset is wrapped correctly, the state will have a harder time reaching it. That promise is overstated. Those structures may matter for lawsuits, probate, partnership disputes, or privacy from casual inquiry. They may help with succession, liability segregation, or administrative order inside a family. But none of them changes the core problem we are discussing here. A county assessor is not trying to discover a hidden yacht in the Cayman Islands. The county already knows the parcel exists. It is mapped, assessed, taxed, and entered into a public system. The property is not invisible. It is the most visible thing you own, and property tax does not usually need to pierce your entity in the dramatic sense people imagine. The obligation is attached to the parcel. If taxes go delinquent, the process proceeds against the property interest itself, according to statute. The shell around the title may affect paperwork, but it does not abolish the tax clock. This is why camouflage fails. You can dress poor, keep a low profile, avoid social signaling, even keep the land operationally modest. None of that neutralizes the county ledger. The assessor does not need to be impressed by your lifestyle. The treasurer does not need to care how little attention you attract. Delinquency is enough. The same goes for a certain kind of sovereign fantasy. The belief that there is a phrase, filing, trust arrangement, or obscure jurisdictional argument that can convert taxable land into untouchable land. In the forensic record, these theories collapse because they mistake legal form for payment capacity. The system is not confused about what it wants. It wants the tax paid in lawful money, by deadline, under the rules in force, and that is why these false shields are so dangerous. They encourage viewers to spend attention on concealment when the real vulnerability is liquidity. They create a feeling of preparation while leaving the one decisive variable exposed. If you want a brutal formulation, here it is. A trust can hold title. An LLC can hold title. A nominee can hold title. But none of them can negotiate with arithmetic. When cash income falls and recurring taxes remain due, legal wrappers do not save land. They may delay embarrassment. They do not stop the mechanism. So before we discuss the actual defense, we need to look at the modern version of this old machine. Because today, in many places, your equity does not even need to be seized by the county directly. It can be sold into a market. The modern version is cleaner, faster, and in some places more impersonal. In the 1930s, a tax sale might still feel local, a courthouse ritual, a known family, a visible transfer inside a county under stress. Today, in many jurisdictions, delinquent taxes can be converted into a financial product. Counties may auction the tax lien itself, allowing investors to buy the claim tied to your unpaid taxes. Or they may move toward a tax deed sale in which the property is sold after the statutory period expires. Official county sale notices describe this plainly. Investors bid on delinquent tax liens, and scheduled online auctions now handle the process at industrial scale. That changes the psychology. Your vulnerability is no longer only a dispute between you and the county. It can become an opportunity set for outside capital. A stranger does not need to hate you, target you, or even know your story. The stranger only needs a return model and a statute. This is where people lose perspective on equity. They assume that because they have substantial value in a property, the system will naturally protect that value. But tax foreclosure law has often worked in ways that do not respect common sense proportionality. The modern legal controversy around home equity theft exists for exactly this reason. Owners in some systems have lost properties over relatively small tax debts, while governments or related processes captured value far beyond the amount owed. The U.S. Supreme Court held in Tyler v. Hennepin County in 2023 that when the government keeps the value above the tax debt, penalties, interest, and costs, that surplus can state a takings clause claim. That ruling matters. But viewers should not misunderstand what it does and does not solve. It does not mean you are safe once you fall delinquent. It does not eliminate tax foreclosure. It does not stop auctions. It does not erase the stress, legal cost, displacement, or forced liquidation. It simply says the government cannot automatically treat your entire equity stake as abandoned surplus merely because taxes went unpaid. Ongoing litigation and policy advocacy in 2025 and 2026 show that states are still adjusting, contesting, or refining how surplus value must be handled after tax foreclosure. So the lesson is not the courts fixed it. The lesson is harsher. In a downturn, your equity can still be exposed to a machinery designed to convert delinquency into transfer, even where you may later have a claim to surplus. You have already suffered the one loss that matters most in a crisis control. Which brings us to the actual defense, the one almost nobody sells because it is too plain to sound clever. The defense is cash reserved for one purpose only: keeping the tax claim from ever crossing the line into legal process. Not emergency cash in the abstract, not investment capital, not a brokerage account you hope will hold up in a drawdown, not equity trapped in equipment, metal, inventory, or land itself. I mean a dedicated property tax reserve sized in months and years, built around the worst lesson in the forensic record. Governments can wait for your income to fail, but they do not wait to keep the tax calendar moving. That is why I would frame this strategy as a 60-month minimum reserve requirement for any property you cannot afford to lose. 5 years of taxes, insurance, and a penalty margin, held in liquid form, isolated from operating expenses and untouched by market volatility. For households with unstable income, contested assessments, multiple parcels, or political risk in the jurisdiction, the more serious number is closer to 10 years. Because the purpose is not yield, the purpose is survival. You are buying time. Time to absorb recession. Time to survive illness. Time to contest an assessment. Time to endure a local collapse in income without converting delinquency into a lien event. Time is what families in the 1930s ran out of first. So the deliverable is simple: a property tax defense cash flow template. Parcel by parcel, you calculate annual tax, insurance, known fees, reassessment risk, and penalty exposure. Then you fund a reserve until the land can carry its own legal overhead through a prolonged contraction. That is the binary choice. Treat land as owned because your name is on the deed, or treat land as owned only when the next 5 years of claims against it are already paid for in liquid form.